broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everyone. We have a few people still getting on the call, so I want to just give it a couple minutes here for people to get on before we get officially started. But while we're waiting, I appreciate everybody coming in, and hopefully you're on because you want to hear about some air permit information about this General Motors proposed permit that's out right now. So we're going to be talking about in a couple minutes. So going to just wait a couple more minutes before we get started with everything, because I see a bunch more people getting on and I don't want them to miss it. So all right. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So first of all, I really want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. We know that people are operating in an imperfect system right now, and there's a lot of unique circumstances going on. So we really hope having this conversation and then other subsequent conversations about this proposed permit is going to allow everyone an opportunity to get information and make a comment if they choose to, or even just get their questions answered is really the main reason we're here tonight. So I wanted to show a slide. I know we do have some people that are just calling in. So we have a couple different things going on right now. We have a bit of a presentation going on if you are on via the internet and you're on the webinar. And then we also have people just listening in on the phone. And just as a reminder, if you've only called in, we won't be able to unmute your line. You know, you're kind of in a listen only mode for the most part, but hopefully this will be productive and we'll get you some other ways to get questions answered if you have them after we have the conversation. But tonight, what I wanted to do is introduce myself. My name is Jennifer Dixon, and I'm going to be moderating our discussion tonight. So as we move through the evening, we have some Air Quality Division staff that are going to be helping answer questions and providing information to you. So you're going to primarily be hearing from myself and then Dave Thompson, who is the permit engineer on the project. But we have some other staff here as well. We have Jeff Korniski, and he's going to be representing the Detroit district. So kind of our field inspector's perspective on the issue. We have Susan Kilmer, who works in our air monitoring unit. Jim Haywood is here to talk about air modeling, and Mike Deppa is here from our toxics unit. So I have all these staff on hand, and after we go through the informational session part in the presentation, I'm going to have you all be able to answer questions if you are listening via the webinar, and I'll have those staff be able to answer those for you. So hopefully that will be really helpful. So tonight, like I said, we're going to do an information session. Dave's going to do a presentation on the proposed permit, kind of talk to you about what GM's asking for and the process we went through to write the proposed permit to be able to present it to you. We're going to have that question and answer session. So we'll do that a few ways, and I'll give you some more information on how to get your questions submitted or be able to ask a question verbally. We're going to talk about how to submit an official comment, because this meeting that we're having tonight is actually the first informational session that we're having as part of a public comment period for this proposed permit. And you'll hear me say this a few times throughout the evening, but the comment period goes all the way until May 29th. So even though we're having this meeting tonight, there's still plenty of time to get information about the proposed project and submit a comment if you want to. We are going to be having an official hearing on the 30th of April, which is next week. So if you wanted to attend that official hearing, we'll talk a little bit more about how to do that later as well. I'll give you some information on where you can find other information about the proposed project. We have a lot of great resources depending on how deeply you want to dig into this. There's certainly the ability to be able to do that. And then I'll also make sure that you get contact information for anybody that you would like to ask further questions of. So just as a reminder, as the presentation portion goes on, your lines are going to be muted. Anytime you would like to submit a question in writing, you can submit that in the question box, and I'll show you how to do that a little bit more on the next slide here. We are going to be recording this webinar, and we will post the webinar and it transcribed with closed captions probably a few days after this hearing. Today's Thursday, so I assume it might be early next week. So again, during the informational session, if you have a question, type it into the question box. And like I said, I'll show you where that is specifically in a second here. Or what you'll be able to do is raise your hand. Now, don't physically raise your hand because obviously I won't be able to see that. We're not on video. But we will unmute your line and you'll be able to speak your question once we get to that part of the day. So just as a reminder that if you are just calling in, you won't be able to actually speak, but hopefully listening to the other questions that people have will be really helpful. So this is just a visual, and I know folks that are just calling in won't be able to see this, but I wanted to show you where that question box is because sometimes it's a little bit hard to find. So it's going to be on your control panel on your GoToWebinar. So you'll see where that red arrow is pointing at the word questions. So you'll just click on that, type your question in the question box, and once we get to that part of the evening, I'll read your questions off for our panelists and allow them an opportunity to answer. Sometimes people would rather do that, type in their question, than actually speak it verbally. Either way is completely fine. In the second circle here, you'll see the little like hand raised with the green arrow. That means your hand is up, so you don't have to click on it multiple times. If you see that little green arrow, that means you have your hand up, and I'll try to get to your questions in the order they were received. If you see the little red arrow pointing down, that means your hand's down. So I don't know that you want to ask a question, and maybe you don't, and that's okay as well. So again, if you're just calling in and you do have access to the internet, but you just would rather call in tonight, you can always email questions to Dave Thompson, our permit engineer, and I'm going to just read his email address right now, as well as his phone number. If you have a moment to pen it down, you can do that, and I will reiterate it again later just so that you have it. So his email address is T as in Tom, H as in help, O as in octopus, M as in Mary, P as in Paul, S as in Sam, O as in octopus, N as in Nancy, D as in David, the number 22, and it's at Michigan, the word all spelled out, .gov as in government. Or you can call him directly at 517-284-6787. So I know we're all working remotely right now, so Dave does have his voicemail message on there right now so that he will give you a call back as soon as possible. He's going to try to do that within 1 business day if people have any other questions about it. So with all of that being said, hopefully that sets the stage for everybody a little bit here. And I'm going to pass it over to Dave now so he can kind of walk you through some of the presentation. And then at the end of that, hopefully we'll get to the end part and you guys can ask questions as we go along, or just remember that raise your hand if you have one. So Dave, whenever you're ready, you can take it away.
All right, thank you, Jen. Good evening, everyone. As Jen said, my name is Dave Thompson. I am the lead permit engineer for the application for the proposed automotive assembly line at the GM Detroit-Hamtramck assembly plant, and am one of multiple AQD staff involved in the review. We're going to start with an overview of the air quality division and then proceed to talk about the proposed project after that. So we all, whoops, I'm sorry, is that? I apologize, I thought it would have gone forward. We all know that pollution comes from many different things, such as big farms, fuel burning vehicles, and various industrial sources. The overall mission of the Air Quality Division is to protect public health and the environment. The AQD has the authority to do this by regulating industrial sources. The AQD is separated into different functions. For example, some air quality staff monitor levels of air pollutants. Other staff look at different toxics to make sure public health is protected. The AQD conducts inspections of regulated facilities, and we review applications and write permits for sources of air pollutants to ensure the operations comply with our rules and regulations. The Air Quality Division does have the authority to permit sources of air pollutants. However, I do want to point out a few items that the permit does not cover and that the AQD does not have the ability to regulate. You'll want to talk to your local government if you have questions or concerns about issues such as zoning, noise, and traffic. I'd next like to give you a simplified overview of the steps that both the applicant and the AQD go through to get a proposed draft permit ready for comment. First, the applicant plans the project. The applicant submits a permit application to the AQD. The application is reviewed by an engineer. Once the permit is peer reviewed and approved by a supervisor, the proposed draft permit is sent to the company for review and then posted for public comment. Comments received during the public comment period are evaluated, and can potentially lead to changes to the proposed permit. Finally, a decision is made on the permit, and that decision can be any of three things. It can be approved as written, approved with changes, or denied. So what is GM proposing? GM is proposing to install a new automotive assembly line at the Detroit-Hamtramck assembly plant. The main portions of the existing assembly line would be removed to provide space for the new line. The main portions of an automotive assembly plant are the body shop for putting together the unpainted vehicle, a paint shop where various paints and other materials are applied, and the assembly area where final operations such as glass, engine, and tire installation are performed. While reviewing a proposed project, the AQD looks at a number of items. We review the level of emissions to figure out how the project and the facility should be classified. Based upon the level of emissions and the type of equipment, we determine what type of review is needed, including which rules and regulations the proposed project is subject to. One part of figuring out the applicable rules for a project is the location of the facility. This map shows the current attainment status for the state of Michigan. An area is considered to be in non-attainment if air concentrations of certain pollutants are above the national standards. Michigan currently has non-attainment areas for two pollutants, ozone and sulfur dioxide, which is also known as SO2. Detroit-Hamtramck Assembly is located in an area that is considered a non-attainment for ozone, which is regulated through two other pollutants, which are the volatile organic compounds, which are also known as VOCs, and oxides of nitrogen, which is also known as NOx. If the overall increase in emissions from a project for these pollutants is high enough, then that pollutant needs to go through what is referred to as a non-attainment permit review. Also, if the increase in overall emissions for certain other pollutants is high enough, then those pollutants need to go through what is called a Prevention of Significant Deterioration, or PSD, permit review. The application addresses these pollutants through a netting analysis for non-attainment and prevention of significant deterioration, as well as where the permit will meet the applicable state and federal regulations. A netting analysis uses the facility's past emissions, certain emission increases and decreases, and the proposed emissions from the new assembly line to get a net change for each pollutant. If the net change for any single pollutant is more than a certain amount, then that pollutant must go through a more stringent review, either a non-attainment or PSD permit review. The netting analysis performed for this project shows that the net change in emissions for any individual pollutant is less than that specified amount. Therefore, no pollutant is required to go through a non-attainment or PSD permit review. I would like to point out that although the proposed project is not subject to these particular types of review, it must still comply with all other applicable rules and regulations, and throughout the review process and during development of the proposed draft permit, the AQD has ensured that the applicable state and rules have been met. For example, the proposed project must show that it would comply with State of Michigan Rule 702 for VOCs. This part of the review is based on what is called a Best Available Control Technology, or BACT analysis. The BACT review results in one of the lowest VOC emission rates per vehicle for any automotive assembly line in the nation. A group of thermal oxidizers would be used to control the exhaust from the main coating portions of the paint shop, lowering the amount of VOC emissions to the atmosphere. In addition to meeting Rule 702, the application shows that compounds emitted from the project would meet their health-based screening levels, and computer simulations, often referred to as modeling, have been performed for NOx and 2 different sizes of particulate matter, which are known as PM10 and PM2.5. This modeling was done to show that no violation of any national standard is expected. The assembly line would also be required to place particulate filters on all spray coating operations to lower the amount of dust and paint particles that exit the plant. If the permit is issued, GM would have to comply with all final conditions that have incorporated the review of these state and federal regulations. GM has also proposed an initial low production period after the assembly line starts making vehicles. During this period, the assembly line would have a lower VOC emission limit and would only be allowed to make a maximum of 10,000 vehicles per year. All control equipment used for lowering emissions during normal production would also be required to run during the low production period. After the low production period ends, the VOC emission limits for normal production would become applicable. Sorry. Based on the review performed, pollutants listed here, as well as a limit on natural gas usage. The proposed draft permit also contains testing, monitoring, and record-keeping requirements that would be used to show that the assembly line meets these limits. If the permit is approved, the emission limits, in combination with the testing, monitoring, and record-keeping conditions, the requirements, ensure that the Detroit-Hamtramck assembly line will comply with the rules and regulations. I'd like to thank you for listening. Please give us a moment and we will continue with our question and answer portion of the informational session.
All right. Yep, I got you, Dave. So thank you for that. Again, just to kind of go over how this is going to work. So I don't have any questions in the question box right now, just to let you know. My boss, Jim, told me that I messed up when I was telling you how to raise your hand. So I apologize for that. What he is reminding me, which I should have already known, is that if you would like to raise your hand and your hand is not up yet, the green arrow means that you do not have your hand up. So I had a couple of people raise their hand and they're like, no, I don't want to raise my hand right now. And the red arrow means that your hand is, the green arrow means that your hand is not up and you have to click it to raise your hand. The red arrow down means your hand is already up and you can lower it by clicking on that. So that is confusing. I apologize for that. But if you have a question and you are listening with us on the web, you can go ahead and do that in the question box. Dave, and I did want to go back to a slide that you had a second ago, the one where we're talking about our last slide with the proposed permit requirements, and you kind of said the review is performed and the emission limits are for the pollutants listed here. And because we have people on the line that can't see these, I'm just going to read them off really quickly while people think about what questions they might want to ask. So there's permit limits for VOC, so volatile organic compounds, particulate matter less than 10 microns in diameter, particulate matter less than 2.5 microns in diameter, nitrogen oxides, sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, greenhouse gases, and then natural gas use. There's also testing requirements and monitoring and record keeping requirements that have been written into the proposed permit. So just kind of wanted to read those out while people were thinking about questions, because I know that we can't always see things, obviously. Just to go over again who we have on our panel. So Dave Thompson is who you've been hearing from. He is the person from our permit section that drafted the permit. But I know that he kind of talked about this before, you know, writing a proposed permit takes a team. So we have Jeff Korniski from our district office. He's right there in Detroit, and he is the assistant district supervisor for that district office. We have Jim Haywood, who works on modeling, air modeling. Mike Deppa works in our toxics unit. And then we have Susan Kilmer from our air monitoring unit. So I know sometimes it's confusing between modeling and monitoring. So if anyone has questions on that, we're definitely happy to answer those as well. So I do have a question. I'm going to go ahead and read it here for you. Okay, so this is a great question. It says, thank you for the information. I noticed that in the draft permit, there is self-monitoring by GM. How often will EGLE conduct unannounced monitoring and inspections? So Jeff, if you could answer that question, that would be great.
Sure. So General Motors, like most auto assembly plants, is a major source under our renewable operating permit program. And under our compliance obligations that we have from EPA, we are required to conduct inspections at this auto plant and most other auto plants every other year. But there's always a continuous evaluation of reports, stack tests that will occur within that 2-year period that will add up, in essence, to the full compliance inspection. So we may go out there, especially at the beginning, probably every year to see how the installation is progressing. There'll be a number of testing events in the early going in order to establish the baseline emissions and to understand if the control equipment is operating as it was stated in the first, I'll say 5 years of the plant's operation. The compliance staff will be out there probably every year and multiple times a year, and we'll be getting reports from GM multiple times in every year in order to assess their compliance. So again, typically for this source and other sources like it, it would be every other year, but especially when you're installing a new operation, we'll be on site probably multiple times in the first few years to assess compliance.
Okay, Jeff, don't hang up yet or mute yourself because I got another question for you. So this question it goes along with that, kind of follows up with it, and it says, can you please give an overview of GM's recent compliance history, like in the past 5 years if you can, and any violations with air quality division, and how responsive was GM to those violations, if any, occurred?
The last violation notice that this particular GM plant had, it was, I believe, in 2013, and prior to that was in 2009. So this plant has not had very many odor complaints in the past. That might change, it might not change. I mean, because the level of the type of control is different in this new process as opposed to the old process. But essentially, again, if you're talking about the last 5 years, they didn't have any violation notices. And if I'm going off of memory, it was probably 2 in the last 10 years.
Okay, thank you. So that was actually the last of the questions that we had typed in. We definitely have plenty more time if anyone has any other questions. Those 2 were really good. Oh, I got another one. Great, I love that. Okay, so this says, and Jeff, this is going to be, let me see, who would this be for? Susan, I think if you can unmute yourself and be ready for this question, this is a pretty good one. It says, regardless of the violations to allowable emission standards, can you speak about the air quality in this area?
Sure. So we do have several air monitoring stations in Detroit, and we have one that is just about 7 miles away. This area of Detroit, as Dave pointed out in his slides, is currently classified as non-attainment or not attaining the National Ambient Air Quality Standard for ozone. So what that means, as Dave explained, that there is some additional and special permitting considerations that occur. There are parts of Southeast Michigan that are non-attainment for sulfur dioxide, but around the plant is not an SO2 non-attainment area. So in general, I mean, that kind of describes as far as the attainment, non-attainment. We also measure fine particulate matter. And the area is meeting the standards for fine particulate matter as measured at the East 7 Mile site, which is at Osborne High School. And again, that's about 7 miles away. We measure nitrogen oxides, ozone, and fine particulate matter at that site.
Okay. So we have a few more questions. So thank you guys for putting these in. This one is a two-parter. So the first part of this question I'm going to give to Jeff. And the second part of this question I'm going to give to Mike. So I'm going to ask the first part first. And Jeff, this goes to what you had brought up as far as odor issues and potential odor issues with the new process. And it says, what kind of odor problems are noticed with this kind of process? So I don't know if you can talk a little bit about your field experience when it comes to facilities like this.
Yeah, the odor experiences we've had are frankly wide and varied. We have, I want to say, and I'm just going to go off of memory, maybe a half dozen auto assembly plants in Wayne County. And our odor experiences with those plants, it's not consistent. There are some plants for which we've had hundreds of odor complaints over the last 10 years or 20 years. Others, we've had relatively few, and I really can't explain why that is. You know, we try to investigate those plants that are having problems and try to resolve the problems, but it's a difficult, it's a difficult, I'm not really sure why it is that for example, Hamtramck has not had odor issues in the past, and I'm not sure what will be in the future because of these types of controls that they have now as opposed to other controls. The odors can come from various parts of the plant. I mean, as if you look through the draft permit, and it's fairly typical, there's a number of coating operations that occur at the plant, different types. There's the electro coat, and then there's usually a base coat, a primer that's applied, and then the top coat, and that's usually like 2 different coatings, and any one of them can produce odors. And so it's really sometimes it's trying to find a needle in a haystack when you're trying to address those issues, because you have to be really almost get on the roof of the stacks of the plant sometimes to differentiate between the different types of paints. And because many of these facilities use dozens of different top coats and a few base coats, sometimes the odors can be related to one specific paint formulation. So in that sense, really, odors are in many ways a reactive approach. It's hard to predict in many instances whether a certain plant will have odor problems. Sometimes it's obvious based upon our past experience that a certain constituent within a paint will produce an odor, but it doesn't seem to be the case here. And so, I mean, I don't expect there to be odor problems, but I could be wrong. And it really, again, it's you can go along the line of the auto assembly plants, and you're going to get a wide experience as to whether they've been producing odors or not producing odors.
So the permit's typically written to try to mitigate that as much as possible. I mean, that is one of the things that the control equipment will do a lot of times, is help with that. And like Jeff said, I mean, it's going to depend on the paint that they're going to be using. There isn't anything necessarily that stands out saying that there's definitely going to be odors here. We would have addressed that in the permit itself, the proposed permit, had we thought there would be odor issues. So the second part of that question is for Mike. And Mike, what that question was, if there was odor issues, would we expect to have health concerns with that, or would there be health concerns typically associated with odors like that?
John, I'm not sure that we could answer that without knowing what type of odors they were. I mean,
yeah,
if it's like a petroleum distillate odor, we could try to trace it back to those chemicals that are being used in for the VOCs that are being emitted. As far as what type of exposure that somebody's getting, it's hard to say what chemical they're being exposed to, and then at what amount they're being exposed to. The permit has a emission rate for each of the toxic air contaminants, such as VOCs or some metals, that all comply with the the screening levels, the health-based screening levels that we've derived for these chemicals. They're air standards that were set to ensure that public health is protected, even for sensitive subpopulations such as those with asthma, the elderly, children. So it's not expected there would be health problems, especially associated with odors. But we could take a look at the particular type of odors if they occur, and then what type of category of chemical could be emitted that would fit.
Sure. So that, I know when part of what you help Dave do with writing this proposed permit is we're looking at all the different constituents of all the coatings that the company said they're going to use. And those constituents need to pass our criteria in order to be even considered to be able to be emitted or used in the permit. So like Jeff had said, we don't expect there to be odors from this. And if there is, it's definitely something that we would want to know about if part of the community was experiencing that. And Jeff's staff would be out to investigate that immediately. That's definitely part of our process. So we have some other questions. Dave, these questions are for Dave. There's a couple for you, Dave. So if you want to unmute yourself a minute, I will get those queued up. So the first question here has to do with greenhouse gases, and it says, which greenhouse gases are being monitored and how are they being monitored? And as a second part of that, are there emission limits in the permit for greenhouse gases specifically?
All of the greenhouse gases are are from combustion of a couple of different fuels. There's natural gas. Excuse me. There's some natural gas combustion for the RTOs and for various, hot water generators, and they're basically all of the greenhouse gases are calculated in terms of CO2 equivalent, CO2e, which is the standard for that. The monitoring is basically there's a limit on natural gas usage, and there is also a limit for greenhouse gases in the permit that limit the amount of natural gas they can use, and therefore the amount of greenhouse gases that can be emitted from the plant over the course of a per year. It was rolling. It's called a rolling 12-month time period.
So can you talk a little bit more about CO2e, because I think that's a concept that a lot of people don't really, people hear the words greenhouse gases, but they don't really know CO2e, like how do we equate that, or why would we call it something different when we're looking at it from a permitting perspective or from an emissions perspective?
Well, there are different compounds created for that. Obviously there are different greenhouse gases, and each one has a different equivalency for how much it affects, how reactive it is or that type of thing. And depending what gas it is, it's given a different factor for how much it, in comparison to what CO2 does, it is given a factor for that. For example, CO2 is a factor of 1. I don't remember them all specifically, but methane is a factor that is, I believe, slightly higher than CO2, and there's some that are higher. And what you do is you take the emissions, you multiply times the factor, and you add them all together, and that is the CO2 equivalent for the expected greenhouse gas emissions. And that's how it's regulated, and that's how it's looked at, and that's what the limit is in there. They can only do so much, and then as I said, there are also it's all from natural gas, and we call them emission factors for the greenhouse gases from natural gas combustion, and that's how the facility would calculate their emissions for those.
Okay. So I have another question for you, and this question is about attainment and non-attainment. So we talk about this quite a bit as far as being some terminology that we use in air quality division, but it's not necessarily widely known, what exactly it means. So could you just talk a little bit more, and maybe we even want to go back to the map here and talk a little bit more about what attainment and non-attainment means. I know you can't necessarily talk about steps we're doing, and I apologize to the asker of this question, and we should have had someone from one of our other units potentially be on the call so they could specifically answer this question. And I know we have some staff that can answer it a little bit, but we'd like to get you a really good answer. So the second part of your question, where you ask if we're not in attainment, what are we doing about it? Basically, I definitely want to get back to you on that. So I think it may be better to formulate a better answer for you, or have one of our staff people call you directly or email you directly. But I'm going to pass that first question over to you, Dave, so you can talk a little bit about attainment, non-attainment. I'm going to scroll back to that map just so folks can see what we're talking about.
Okay. Okay, so this is the this is what we call our Attainment Status Map, and there are basically the national the EPA has established concentrations like ambient. They're called NAAQS. It's National Ambient Air Quality Standards. It's shortened to NAAQS, and those are concentrations of specific pollutants in the air, and when it goes above the standard that has been set by the EPA for a certain amount of time, an area is considered to be in non-attainment. And in this, you can see the majority of Michigan is green, which is an attainment. They're unclassifiable. And there's some areas. The blue is in ozone non-attainment, and the striped is SO2 non-attainment. So basically, in those, over the course of I'm sorry, I don't remember. I believe it's a few years, but I don't remember exactly off the top of my head the time frame. The concentrations for those have been higher than a certain point, and when they do that, that area is designated as non-attainment, and there are certain steps that we have to go through in order to get it back into non-attainment. But as I said, as Jen said, I think specific steps might be better answered by one of our other people. So as I said, if you could provide that.
Yep, the questioner, they have their email address that she already sent it to me, so thank you. And I'll have one of our staff people get back to you tomorrow directly on that. Because we have a plan. It's a very involved plan. Coming back into attainment can sometimes be challenging because over the years, especially with ozone, what has happened is the standard itself that we need to meet has been lowered. And so it's kind of throwing up a challenge for us and making it harder and harder for us to meet that. So we have to rely on a lot of different things and a lot of different strategies to lower our ozone so that we can get back into attainment. And it's based on, some math and some really fun calculations to kind of get us there. So, and I think what we'll probably do too is, since that came up here, and I apologize again that we didn't plan on that, and it's a great question. So we'll for sure have someone on the line for our public hearing meeting next week, and probably for our next public meeting as well when we have our one in May in a month or so. So the next question is going to be back to you again, Mike. So I just wanted to let you know that, so you have a little bit of a heads up. But before I pass that over to you, we had a question about employee health issues at the facility. So that's a great question. Unfortunately, it's not something that we deal with at EGLE. It's something that would be better answered by someone from the Michigan OSHA. If you are really interested in that, I can definitely hook you up with a person you could talk to. So just let me know if you want more specific information about that. It's just not something that we deal with, or we even have access to that information. So this question, Mike, is for you, and it says, there are about 22,000 people living in Hamtramck. It's very densely populated. Has the Air Quality Division established any baseline health indicators of folks close to that area? And I think the question goes on a little bit too here. Let me just make sure I didn't miss. Oh yeah, just folks close to that Detroit-Hamtramck assembly plant area.
The short answer is no. Our regulations don't specify that we take into account population health. But what we do is we make sure that all the emissions and their impacts to the fence line comply with our air toxics rules. And so there's two different types of categories of pollutants. There's the criteria air pollutants. Dave has talked a little bit about those. Those are the ozone, particulate matter, nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, lead. Those are accounted for in the permit, and they take into account the background level of the pollutant in the air. But the other category of pollutants are the air toxics, and we make sure that each of the various air toxics that are emitted by the facility at the fence line, that their impact is less than the standard. And this standard, as I mentioned before, is protective for sensitive subpopulations. So we believe that, even if we did take into account health rates of, various diseases in the area, that the emissions from the facility would not contribute to any adverse effect. I hope that answered your question.
Yep, I think that laid it out fairly well. So, and that was the last of our questions that we have. I've been kind of checking to see if anyone wanted to raise their hand and verbalize a question here, and I don't see anyone right at the moment. That was the last of our typed in questions, but like I said before, we definitely have time. Oh, good, we have another question. All right, thank you so much. I know sometimes if I fill in the gaps, you guys are done hearing me talk and you'll ask another question, so I appreciate that. Okay, so this is going to be for Dave. Dave, it says, the permit contains an Appendix A that is a table of RTO operating scenarios. Can you explain how to interpret the table? So, and then also define RTO again for people listening.
Yes. Whoops, hold on. Am I unmuted? Yes. Yes, RTO stands for regenerative thermal oxidizer. It's a type of oxidizer, obviously. It burns natural gas and uses that to control the VOC emissions from various things. Now, the unique aspect, I think, to the design of this particular plant, I mean, there might be some out there, but I'm not aware of them, is that the way they're designing it is that there's a part of the coating process is called top coat. There's basically, as I think Jeff went through a little bit of it earlier, you have ELPO, it's electrodeposition coating, which puts a protective layer on the automobile. There's prime booths, which is primer, which is also known as guide coat, which puts on, the primer coat, and then top coat, which is typically a base coat, which is more the color, and then there's a clear coat that goes on top of it. The way that they've designed it is that there are up to six different top coat lines. And based on how many of the top coat lines are operating, that determines how many RTOs need to be operating in order to control that level. So if you look at the scenario 1, there's ELPO tanks operating, and I'm sorry for the people on the phone, you can't see this, but that basically has the electrodeposition, which is shortened to ELPO. It has the ELPO running, and they're only running one mod, so they only need to run so much, and then they run one primer and one top coat. You only need 2 RTOs running at the bottom. The booth RTOs, which control certain sections, and you have the oven RTOs, which is it's a bank of RTOs. And as you run more and more equipment, that requires more and more RTOs to run in order to control that. And that's basically what that is. And I hope that was explanatory. I hope that explained it well enough. But basically, that's the more top coat mods you run, maybe shorten the modules, the more RTOs need to be operating in order to do that. And we felt that putting that in the appendix gives the inspector a better idea of, okay, at this time they were running, 4 mods, so they need to be running at least 2 booth RTOs and both of the oven RTOs at this time. So that would be a quick reference for anybody looking at the permit.
Okay. I don't know if I'm more confused or not. I think I need to be looking at it. So I think you're right when you're saying you apologize to people on the phone, and we're definitely going to tell you how to be able to look at that information in case you haven't had a chance to look at it already and you would like to look at it. It's definitely a little bit of a deeper dive into what we're doing here today and the proposed permit for sure. But that was again the last question, so I just want to put it out there. What I'm going to do is kind of talk about some more of the issues that we have going on as far as how you can submit a comment and some things like that. And if you have questions in the interim, definitely type them in and feel free to raise your hand and we'll unmute you. So because a part of the purpose of this is to be able to submit an official comment on the record. I mean, we want to be able to have conversations with folks and answer your questions, and so that you can understand as much about these proposed processes and these proposed permits as you possibly can. And understanding that's very technical, and a lot of times it's hard to do that. So we're hoping that these conversations can help. But the ultimate goal is that you be able to participate in whatever way you feel comfortable. And if part of that is submitting an official comment on the record, we want you to have a lot of different ways that you can do that. So I'm not going to read off the addresses, etc. I'll read the email address in case you want that. But just so that you can submit a hard copy comment by mail. A lot of people still do that. It's perfectly acceptable. If you for some reason would like to submit a hard copy by mail, you can either send an email to the email address I'm going to give you in a second. You can give Dave a call. He's happy to provide you with the hard mailing address directly, things like that. It might be easier than just writing it down right now. If you want to submit an official comment by email, you can do that. The address for that is EGLE, EGLE -AQD PTI public comments. So PTI public comments is all one word, and that's at michigan.gov. We also have set up a voicemail. So if you're listening on the line and you have a comment that you want to make for the record, you are more than welcome to call this number. I'm going to read it out in a second and leave your comment via voicemail. It's another very easy way for you to, get us the information that you want us to have about the proposed permit here. So that number is 517-284-0900. It's 517-284-0900. So it is a voicemail box, so it gives you instructions on how to leave your comment. So we would love for you to also do that. If you really want to voice your comment verbally during a public hearing, it's not necessary. We take comments in all different kinds of ways, but if you would really like to, you can attend our virtual public hearing on April 30th. So that's going to be next week. We'll make sure that anybody who is listening in on the webinar, we will directly send you a link to register for that other webinar and then if you're interested, you can. There's other different ways you can find out how to participate in that public hearing. You can also just call in to listen if you're doing that now and you'd like to do that next week. You can do that as well. Again, you can give Dave a call, give myself a call, and we will get you the information you need to be able to do that. We've also posted that online. If you have access to the internet, that information is available online as well. Some other information that's available about this proposed project, what we try to do is give you guys as much information as you want, or as least amount of information as you want. So We have some different levels here. The first one is our proposed project summary, which is just a broad overview of the project, what the company asked for, kind of what the process is that they're proposing to install, and a little bit about air quality in the area and stuff like that. The technical fact sheet has a lot of very technical information about the review of the project and how we came up with some of the proposed permit conditions. You can also view those proposed permit terms and conditions. So Appendix A, as Dave was talking about earlier, is included there. There's links to other information to access the virtual public hearing on April 30th. And then we're also going to be posting some information, like for instance, the recording of this informational session tonight, as well as information about the next informational session that will happen in May. So it's a little confusing. We're having the hearing kind of in between the two informational sessions. However, the hearing itself will also be another opportunity to answer questions and get those questions answered, as well as to provide comment. You can provide comment all the way up until May 29th. So the comment period is open until midnight on May 29th. And like I said earlier, there's all those different ways that you can submit your comments to us. On the screen right now is the contact information for everyone you heard from tonight, as well as Bob Burns. He's another one of our inspectors that helps us out a lot with any sort of automotive plants. So any of the people on the screen, and like I said, I'm just going to read Dave's out, and I'm sorry, Dave, I'm putting you on the spot there, but I want people to have pretty much just one contact person, and Dave's great at making sure the right person gets your question. We'll get you an answer as soon as we possibly can. We'll try to do it within the next business day, if at all possible. But so Dave Thompson, again, his email address is thompsond22@michigan.gov. So that's T as in Tom, H as in help, O as in octopus, M as in Mary, P as in Paul, S as in Sam, O as in octopus, N as in Nancy, D as in Dave, the number 22 at Michigan, all spelled out, .gov as in government. And his phone number again is 517-284-6787. So any of these people would be more than happy to answer your questions. I know we had a couple questions that we couldn't answer tonight, and we'll definitely have answers for those when we meet again on the 30th. So please feel free to join us for that conversation as well. I'm not seeing any other questions written into the question box here, and I'm not seeing any other hands up. So I think we're probably going to go ahead and sign off here a minute, but we do want to thank you so much for taking the time to be with us tonight. I know it was a little bit of short notice, and again, we understand there's a lot of challenges going on with everyone right now. So hopefully this was an opportunity for you to get some of your questions answered and get some resources on how to get more questions answered in the future, or how to participate in this process by submitting a comment for the record. So that being said, I'm kind of stalling a little bit just in case anybody has any other questions, but we, again, really, really appreciate your time. We hope everyone stays safe, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your evening. So thanks so much, and hopefully we'll talk to you soon.